Hello and welcome to my channel. In this one I'll do a winter landscape. I'm going to do this in charcoal. I'm just going to do the initial sketch with a graphite pencil so that I know where the slope is, and then I'm going to use some charcoal powder to work on the sky. I'm going to blend that with a paper towel very gently. I don't really need that much value. I just don't want it to be white. Now I can start working on the trees at the top of that slope to the left. First I'm going to add some of these lower bushes and smaller trees. And then I'm going to draw a taller tree here to the left. This one is going to be a little bit larger, and obviously it's going to be a bit more detailed. So first I draw the vertical line to indicate the size and the shape of the tree trunk, and then I start working on the horizontal shapes. It's a snowy winter landscape, but the trees aren't really going to be covered with snow. It's mostly going to be coniferous trees. So I'm starting on the first one. And by the way, I should say a few words about the materials. Right now I'm using a piece of vine charcoal, so a soft natural charcoal stick. And it's allowing me to make these marks of irregular shape, and I can make these look like foliage on a tree. In some places I will add a charcoal pencil. I'm using a Master Touch medium charcoal pencil. It's a woodless charcoal pencil, and I'm using it to get some slightly darker values, slightly darker tones in some places. So once I have that, I'm just going to add a few more trees. If you want to examine the reference, it'll be in the description. I actually picked one of the old World War II photos. It was a winter scene with a German Panzer in it. I just removed the Panzer and I focused on the snowy or the winter landscape. On this slope there are some darker shapes. These are some of the rocks or patches of that slope which aren't covered with snow. The way that I interpret it to mean is that these are just either some jutting rocks or some parts of that slope which aren't completely covered by snow. Maybe the snow has partially melted or something. Doesn't really matter. I think the contrast between those darker and lighter shapes should create a suggestion that we're looking at a snow-covered scene. Now I'm modifying some of those shapes slightly with a kneaded eraser. And just making sure that I connect these lighter or white areas a little bit better. So I think it's already starting to look like a bunch of trees on a snow-covered slope with some rocks, and that's basically where I'm going with this. Here on the right side I'm going to add some more trees. Pretty much the same size as the one on the left, because they're more or less on the same distance, at the same distance from our viewpoint. Some of the ones in the middle are going to be a little bit further away from our viewpoint, and I'm going to make them smaller. Needless to say, as usual, I won't stick to my reference photo religiously. I will improvise as much as I want to. but I will try to capture the general idea. It's a winter landscape with a large tall pine tree in the foreground, I suppose, or close to the foreground area. Here I'm drawing some more trees in the distance. These are a little bit further away. Still trying to imitate that conical coniferous shape of evergreen trees. And now I'm drawing some more of that terrain, snow-covered terrain. This time these darker patches that I'm drawing are a little bit smaller and packed a little bit more tightly together because they're much further away from a viewpoint. And I'm just going to keep adding these trees, first drawing the vertical line and then drawing some details on the sides to make them look a bit more convincing. But they don't have to be super detailed because they are a part of the background, so it doesn't really matter. I think a piece of vine charcoal or willow charcoal is probably the best tool for drawing trees, especially when you're looking at trees at a distance and they don't have to be super detailed. So you can draw shapes of trees very, very easily, very quickly, and actually make them look pretty good without much effort. It takes a little bit of practice, but I think it's really not that complicated. If you want to see the longer version of this, if you want to see the full process, you should check out my Patreon, because that's where I post full-length videos and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm starting to work on this tree in the foreground, this tall pine tree, which will be sort of the focus of this drawing. But it's moved slightly to the right. I want it asymmetrical like that, I suppose. This would look a little bit better, or at least it would be easier for you to follow what I'm doing if my camera was adjusted a little bit better. This way you can't really see everything I'm doing at the top here, but I guess I didn't pay attention to that. So I'm just going to start at the top here and then work my way down. So I have a tall shape of a tree trunk, and I'm just gradually adding details on the sides, like these branches growing out to the side, and then maybe smaller branches growing out of them. And then of course those clusters of needles forming around the boughs and branches. And I'm drawing these clusters of needles by making short marks with a piece of vine charcoal. This piece of vine charcoal is proving to be very useful here, and as I've already mentioned, I like drawing trees with it. It's a very convenient tool whether you want to draw coniferous trees or deciduous trees. You can imitate the appearance of foliage of either of these two types of trees. Occasionally you can see that I'm drawing these tiny marks which are detached from the rest of the cluster. That also looks very realistic, because when you look at trees at a distance you will see that you have these small either individual leaves or clusters of leaves or needles in this case, which are connected to the larger branches by smaller branches and twigs, which are barely visible when you're looking at them at a distance. So that's why you can just draw these tiny shapes that look like foliage and make them a little bit more detached from the rest of the cluster. Now, some of the branches are broken off. I don't have to draw the full shape. I'm going to make it look like in some places the tree trunk is a little bit bare, like the canopies are a little bit less dense in that area. When drawing these branches, it's important that they taper as they grow out, so in order to make the base a little bit thicker, you can go back, trace your way back and make the branch a little bit thicker at the base and a little bit thinner, or a little bit thinner at the end. I just keep working my way down and drawing some more foliage. And I did most of the work with a piece of vine charcoal, but here and there I throw in a little bit of charcoal pencil, but mostly on the tree trunk, because I want parts of it to be a little bit darker and also a bit more detailed. I want to allow that charcoal pencil to create a little bit of texture. Now I think you can tell if you're looking at the tree trunk that the foliage is casting a bit of shadow onto the tree trunk, making some parts of the tree trunk a little bit darker. Other parts of it are a little bit lighter because maybe the light is breaking through or showing through the branches and the foliage. But I think you can tell the tree trunk is a little bit lighter on the left side, which means that the shadow side is on the right. The light source is coming more from the left. I'm just refining the appearance of some of these clusters and branches by adding a little bit more of the charcoal pencil. So for those of you who are not really familiar with these types of materials, charcoal pencils are made of compressed charcoal, and they are a little bit darker than vine charcoal, and they tend to stick to the surface of the paper better than charcoal does, better than natural charcoal does. Vine charcoal is natural charcoal that comes in sticks and is basically made out of burnt pieces of wood, either vine or willow. So these are thin sticks that, as simple as they are a great drawing tool. But charcoal pencils obviously are more convenient. They're harder, they can be sharpened like a pencil, held just like a pencil, and they can, when sharpened, they give you very nice, clean, precise marks, almost like a graphite pencil. Some of them are a little bit better than others. I prefer these because these woodless charcoal pencils, Master such woodless charcoal pencils, because they're relatively easy to sharpen. That's one of the most important things for charcoal pencils for me. The paper I'm working on is a Fabriano drawing paper. It's about 9 times 12 inches in size. So I'm working my way down the tree trunk and just shading segment by segment. Always adding a little bit more shadow around those areas where there is more foliage. And I finally reached the base or the bottom of the tree. As you can see, I'm adding a little bit of texture, trying to imitate the appearance of the tree bark. It doesn't have to be exactly like it is in the reference. I just want a little bit of texture. Here at the bottom there's a bit of shadow. That shadow is probably coming from the slope, which is hiding that part of the tree trunk from the light source, or it's casting a shadow onto that part of the tree trunk. Some of these bottom clusters of foliage, I made them a little bit darker so that they would stand out against those trees in the background. Finally, here I'm starting to work on this snowy path, or a muddy path in the middle. And I'm first going to shade it lightly with a piece of vine charcoal, just to establish a little bit of base value and a bit of random texture. And then I'm going to refine it a little bit and add some detail. But you can see that the road is going to be a little bit darker than the snowy sides. And also the sky is a bit darker, kind of murky, a little bit darker than that snowy surface. So I'm just going to shade it a little bit more. It's not going to be that dark, but I just wanted something to work with because I'm going to be erasing on top of that. So in order to erase and create contrast between the lighter and darker details, you still need to have something to work with. You need to put down some material down first on the paper, because that way when you erase a mark, the lighter mark will show against that slightly darker background. Now it's time for me to finish the rest of this slope on the left by adding a lot of these darker shapes, and once again the ones which are further back, which are further away from our viewpoint, those are going to appear smaller and more dense, and the ones that are closer to our viewpoint are generally going to be a little bit larger. But I will have some larger shapes, some smaller shapes, some tiny shapes, so I want a lot of variation, just like you see in the reference. But like I said, of course, it's a little bit more random here, and I can't really imitate every single shape that I see in the reference. So I'm just going to try to draw something that kind of looks like the reference photo, because I like the winter scene. And even though it's a war scene or a World War II photo, I decided to make it just a regular landscape. So now I'm adding some more detail to this muddy, snowy road by using a charcoal pencil, just defining the edge between the side of the road and the road a little bit better, and then adding some more texture and some darker detail to it. I want it to look like it's been trodden and like lines were carved into it because of the traffic. And that I want to make it look like some parts of it are a little bit raised, others are a little bit sunken in. Just adding some random darker details here and there, just to create more contrast and some points of interest. So that it's not dull and too monotonous in terms of value. All of these tiny shapes need to be casting a bit of shadow to the right, just so that we can stay consistent with the light source. And now I'm using a pencil eraser to erase some lighter marks, again staying consistent with the direction of the light. Basically, whenever I see a darker shape, I erase a little bit to its left, and that makes it look more three-dimensional, because it looks like a 3D object that has its light side and the shadow side. Just refining some of those darker shapes along the side of the road. You can't really blend too much here, because that'll ruin the clean edges and the contrast between those darker shapes and lighter shapes. I did a little bit of blending, but for the most part I want it nice and clean. Now here I'm starting to work on the other side of the road, and I'm adding a bit more of those darker shapes around the tree, like maybe there's a little bit more shadow there, or maybe the snow had melted a bit more around the tree. Because there was less of it. So I've pretty much done most of the work on the right side of the road, and now I'm gonna add some more detail to the road and kind of finish it, wrap it up. I'm just erasing a little bit on this right side, trying to connect some of these lighter shapes so that they make a little bit more sense, and so that they're a little bit cleaner, so that the edges of them are a little bit cleaner. This would be a good time for me to remind you to check out my other videos and to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Give me a like and comment, let me know what you think about the video. I'm adding some random darker and lighter details to the road here, just a little bit of texture, a little bit of detail to make the foreground area a bit more interesting, because it has to be a bit more interesting, it has to be a bit more detailed, I suppose. I'm just making the sides of the road look a bit more irregular, so that we don't have a nice clean straight line, but rather something a bit more irregular looking. Anyway, the scene is done. I'm going to put my signature in the lower left corner, and this is what it looks like. Thanks for watching. Once again, if you want to see the full video and more content, check out my Patreon. Bye bye.